In 2018, we created as one of our priority agendas to engage in truth-telling with the kind of intentionality that would impact changing the narrative. Unless and until we can change the narrative, which begins with telling the truth, we will not be able to address the issues that confront this nation and indeed the world. And certainly we cannot speak about changing and transforming systems. We are beyond just playing musical chairs with policy, but we're really engaged in the work of transforming systems. We know that the role of faith is unique. There is none other like the power of the divine and the organization of those who are grounded in the power of the divine to do this work. And so we as a faith-inspired, faith-based organization are going to stay on the ground, and it is indeed to stand in holy space. Come on now. Holy ground. That's it. To be at this museum, the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee.
One thing we realized that regardless if we're so-called black or so-called white, the biggest issue is that we're poor in the city, and this is what perpetuates a lot of what else happens. A lot of it is interchangeable and intermingled. So they got my wheels to turn. Okay, what else is going on? What else are they lying to us about? And just speaking up, speaking truth to power. Later, in 2016, something significant happened where there was just a lot of tension, a lot of pressure in the air. Just people was actually fed up, and we ended up marching to the Hernando de Soto Bridge and shut it down for closely 6 hours. And out of that, we realized that the powers that be wanted to give us everything we wanted just so they can get us off that bridge. And so it started us to thinking, what's actually with this, And if you relate it back to even what King was fighting for when we was here, is the economics. They was worried about the money that they was losing while that bridge was shut down, because it's a big corridor for people to pretty much go from here to Mexico. so they wanted to be able to free that up, a lot of commerce. And we was looking into it was roughly $100 million we cost them that night just by shutting it down. And so it started, our brains are ticking like, hey, this is what they care about. When it comes down to it, the commerce. This is all that they react to, is if you can show them a force of power. And so with that, civil disobedience has been one of the biggest things that the Coalition of Concerned Citizens has inoculated in the city as the last 2-3 years. Most definitely since 2016, C3 formed out of that bridge shut down, recognizing that we have to break a lot of the barriers. I was fortunate enough to have elders who spilled a lot of knowledge into it and kind of woke me up to realize that we have to not just pay attention to the color of the skin, but the people who's in the same predicaments and the same conditions as us. And so it started me to moving and organizing around my Latinx community, the Palestinians, who's also being oppressed just as much as we are right now. And so on and so forth, even the so-called whites that's living in poverty. And so that started out, brains are turning like, who's controlling the funds here? The Chamber of Commerce in Memphis tomorrow. So we ended up doing an informational picket on the Chamber of Commerce in Memphis tomorrow, because looking into them, they still had highlighted on their website, they was courting businesses here on low wages. And it smacked us in the face like, what the, Long story short, we did an informational picket, highlighting this was going on. They didn't want that, going out so far. Within 30 minutes, Shay Flynn and Phil Trineri was down on the ground trying to see what's going on. Yeah. And one of the things we brought up was temp agencies. Temp agencies pimp us to death. Temp agencies in a right-to-work state at that. Right. So it's a double whammy, And so reading into how the temp agencies regulated, we found out that contractually they were supposed to pay $12 an hour, and they wasn't. That's right. At the same time, Electrolux was working on unionizing, IBW was working on unionizing Electrolux, and Come to find out, because I'm also a labor organizer for Fight for 15.
You better say that.
We kind of bump heads and just figuring out how can we help. Since started going into meetings with the Chamber of Commerce, they're controlling a lot of the temp agencies that's hiring people for Electrolux. IBW has the data, and so we started figuring out we have to be intersectional, because we have information in all these silos, and it's hurting us the most. So we decided, hey, come on into these meetings so that the Chamber of Commerce can hear it firsthand with the data that you guys have. And so they started working behind doors on making sure a lot of these things were actually being held accountable on, because no one was holding them accountable. There was no apparatus to make sure they're held accountable just with the temp agencies.
I feel like all day, everything that we've heard, if we close our eyes, you just call it 2018. And we had the conversation over lunch, pretty much how did we not have this conversation in 2058? 68, damn it. Excuse me. 2068.
68.
And I just, I wanted to say that as someone who's interested in politics myself, clearly, it sits with me. The political power has no value until it turns into economic value. And as we're facing critical election years of 18, 19, 20 here at home in Memphis and nationally, but local politics is where our focus definitely needs to lie. And while we are having heightened conversations about voter turnout and engagement, it's not trickling down. Like you said, the apathy is not dispelling in the people we want to get to the polls. So to us, we're all fired up, and we're at these tables, and we're on Twitter, and we're in these rooms, but the same folks who we need to get out to vote, it's not getting down, right? And so how do we get this value at a time when our whole county could turn color? By 2020 we'll be a mostly Republican county if we don't get the message out.
I think it's part of education. And let us commend Ms. Sawyer for her fight to remove these Confederate statues in Memphis. Ms. Sawyer, you didn't let that fight die. In 2005, we started that fight. We brought in Al Sharpton, and the Klan came to town from Kentucky, Missouri, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi. The Klan came to town. So the sheriff called me that night before and said, Mr. Gray, there will be an unmarked car in your driveway because you have been targeted. You and DeArmie Bell and Walter Bell and Dwight Montgomery, you've been targeted, and we will be protecting you. The next day when we got to the park, they had surrounded the park in their trucks, and they were just angry, mean, ready to fight. And so Sister Sawyer, that same fervor that you used to do what you did in picking that fight up and achieving that, voter education and registration, and teaching our young people the connection between the vote and the dollar.
I just want to express, as I try my best to hold back the tears,
Bless you, man.
the depth of the gratitude that the emerging leaders of the legacy that you all helped to sustain. How grateful we are for your contributions, your sacrifices, and also that y'all trust us enough to carry the mantle. So that everybody would know that there is no rift, but that there is a continuum in this freedom movement, and that we recognize and acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of giants like yourself.
Bless you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There seems to be a privileging of certain unions. How do we get out of the box where the police unions, for instance, are loved and respected, and just, fire unions maybe too in certain cities and places, and other unions are looked at as you fill in the blank. And it seeps into the community, and that's what you were getting at, Brother Bill, about, do we even now appreciate the role of unionized labor and labor period? So can you speak a little bit in the time remaining about how can we get away from privileging or looking at one union as like good and other unions like bad?
Some unions are looked at from a different perspective just because of the services they offer.
Okay.
But you think back to 1968, and the sanitation workers proved that picking up garbage is an essential service.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And we just need to let the powers that be realize that it's an essential service. 2015 through the first quarter of 2016, the AFL-CIO convened their own commission on racial and economic justice. I'm specifically talking about fire, police, and some of our bigger unions. We have to mirror the people that we represent.
Yes.
And so we have to have more diversity in the leadership of our union, the same way we have to have more diversity in the leadership of our legislators.
Right.
We have to stop assuming that poor people are stupid. We have to stop assuming that marginalized people are stupid because, and I say that we're assuming they're stupid because we always hear about education. You cannot educate somebody to come out of poverty with financial literacy if they're making $8 an hour.
Right.
So you can't educate me to be rich on $8 with rich dad, poor dad. You can't bring me to the table and talk to me about how to access these services if you're not empowering my voice. And so one of the first things I learned when I started organizing was the fact that we got to take our capes off. We come into these rooms with our capes tied on trying to save everybody. These people we do not need saving. We save ourselves every day. We are living and breathing and working in the worst of circumstances, and we are surviving and thriving. What we need to be, what needs to happen is we need to be the center of this. Yeah. Our voices. If you trust Black people, then you trust their experience. You can't just give a data point that says that, 42% are living in poverty, and then we're not going to talk about how we get to that poverty. We're not going to talk about the systemic issues that lead to that. We can't have a conversation about community resources and not talk about the fact that our tax dollars, which my sister said here earlier, that's our money. So it's not about divesting from tax dollars. It's about earning those dollars and telling them and putting them back in our communities and making sure that that's the number one priority, in addition to building up communities. And we got to understand we have a Black city council, and a lot of folks still in poverty. So the apathy has nothing to do with the fact that they don't know. You don't have to know what the commissioner's supposed to do to understand that when they got in office, they didn't change your life. That's not ignorance. That's not what that's so we gotta stop. We gotta take that. We gotta stop coming to the table all the time speaking for people. We're not bringing them in the room, right? We're not bringing them in the room. We're talking for them. We've not asked them what they need. We've not asked them what they want. And we're not representing them. And a lot of times we're sitting in these academic spaces having these theological conversations, and it has no grounding in the work on the ground. We haven't been back to the hood in 20 years.